Hello and welcome to the Lasting Mission podcast. I'm the host for today, Britt Myers, and I'm here with our guest, Heba Abdelaal. Heba, so excited to have you and thank you so much for joining us. I'd love to just start by hearing a little bit more about you. You can just tell us a little more about yourself and maybe what you're up to these days.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Britt, so much for having me. I'm really excited for this conversation. It's going to be a lot of fun. My name is Heba Abdelaal, like you mentioned. I am a recovering congressional staffer, and that is how we refer to ourselves. So I am not, breaking any news here or, trailblazing anything. But yeah, I had the really good fortune of getting to work on defense policy and veterans affairs policy for my home state senator, Senator John Bozeman of Arkansas, before I became a part of the military community as a military spouse. And so now my advocacy, or what I get to help volunteer and contribute to our military community, is helping military spouses and members really understand how can we be the most effective advocates, whether it's on Capitol Hill, in our local communities, or generally with society as we help bridge that civilian military divide on what is military service and what benefits are there to being a part of this community.
Yeah, that's why I'm so excited to talk to you because you have so many different angles and perspectives that you can bring. And like you said, you spent, a decade at Capitol Hill, and you were advocating for military members and their families even before you became a military spouse yourself. But what got you into that line of work back in the day?
Well, it kind of happened on accident, as most maybe advocates would say about themselves, that they become accidental advocates. Well, I became an accidental congressional staffer. And I say that because I moved to Washington, D.C. right out of college without a job. I would never recommend anyone consider doing that, but it was a great learning experience for me. And what I learned in an initial internship on Capitol Hill in Senator Bozeman's office is that there is such an opportunity there in that space to really help use the power of policy to shape people's lives, to help people. And that was really interesting and intriguing to me. It became a very strong and deep connection and sense of purpose that I grew to have, and seeing just there was nothing more rewarding than getting to help support the programs and the policies and the initiatives that would ultimately help care for our nation's service members and those who had served in uniform. And so it really became, I wouldn't say like a labor of love, because it was obviously my job, right? But it became became very personal, because I would hear stories from individuals and families who were either struggling or needed help understanding what Congress was working on and what we were trying to do. And in hearing all of those stories, I built some really personal and deep connections and relationships with constituents, and it just really endeared me to this community even more.
That's amazing. Did you have a connection to the military community prior to that, or did that really come through that work and then after when you became a military spouse yourself?
So I did have friends, that had served. When I was in college, actually, my very best friend, her name is Kat. She'll love that I mentioned her on this on this
Shout out,
episode.
Kat.
Hey, Kat. Yeah, she's amazing. She actually was in the Army ROTC program, ended up commissioning, and she was a nurse in the Army for several years. And it was really through her, if I wanted to spend time with her and hang out with my friend, I was spending a lot of time at the ROTC building. And so I didn't know much about the logistics and the ins and outs and all the lingo or acronyms. But I did know that there was something really special about the people who volunteered to serve on behalf of our national defense. And I learned that really early on from her. And it was something that I just continued to carry. So any opportunity I had to work with the military community or the veterans community, especially, as I grew on Capitol Hill, it was something that, I always raised my hand. I was like, yes, pick me. I want to go, because it's just such a fun community to get to be a part of. So.
Yeah, I was going to ask you what motivated you most in your work with military families, but it sounds like it was some of these personal connections and then even some of those relationships you were building while you were on Capitol Hill. Is that accurate to say?
Yeah, I would say so. And I think my life, military service was not my path. I did always feel a calling for for public service. And so serving in that role as a staffer, helping constituents share their stories or share their experiences with all of us so that we could better understand how Congress can help support them and support their unique needs. I loved that work, and it became very real for me personally once I became a spouse, because then I started experiencing firsthand some of the things that I was hearing about from military families, and so it just lent a totally different kind of perspective and level of empathy and understanding that yes, PCSs are when Murphy's Law, which is the only law in the world we cannot change, by the way. It's accurate statement, 100% fact based, but understanding that when all of these challenges maybe happen simultaneously, just how frustrating it can be sometimes to access the resources and the programs that we talk about, providing to this community. And so it just lent me a totally different perspective in that way. And I do have to say, it's incredible as military spouses, military members, even senior leaders and their spouses, as they've shared with me some of those experiences. It's just helped me learn and grow so much. And it's incredible what this community does for one another each and every day, all over in every corner of the world. So I appreciate getting to be a part of that.
Well, I love that you said that because you had shared a story about a fellow spouse who helped you adjust to an overseas move. And we all can feel the pain of just moving locally, how much of a headache that can be, let alone across the country. So how did that impact you, and why do you think those relationships are so important between military spouses or even the military family community?
Absolutely. So I think one of the most important aspects of military life is community.
Mhm.
And the spouse that you're talking about, she's my neighbor. Her name is Maggie. So shout out to
Shout
Maggie
out to
too.
Maggie.
I know, right? Just shout outs all over the place. But Maggie was moving overseas the same time we were, and our spouses are actually part of the same unit, and so, but we hadn't really spent time together, right? We didn't really know each other, and then all of a sudden we found ourselves in a very similar situation overseas during COVID, um, and in every other sense, kind of having every excuse to be isolated from other people and not being able to build that community in a new location once we moved here, and not really getting to go do all the sightseeing or the travel. And so it felt very isolating, and it was very, very difficult. But this spouse, Maggie, what she did, the simple, gesture of what she did was, inviting me to come over and hang out with the kids in the backyard as they were running around, or, hey, we want to have game night. Let's do that. And it became like a very small, again, gesture, but it was really meaningful just to say, okay, this is a really informal support network, but it provides something that I really need in this moment, which is connection and that sense of belonging somewhere. And so, being far from loved ones overseas, I just cannot stress enough how important that connection is, and finding those people to connect to, even informally.
Yeah, it is important. And I think, COVID now, looking back at 2020, feels a bit like a fever dream, no pun intended, right? It's like, how was that so close and also so long ago? I'm sure there were so many more challenges that you all faced too that we might have forgotten about. Was there anything that stands out during that time, separate from just the isolation, of course, and moving to a new country, but any other challenges that maybe the military community or spouses were facing that just got magnified because of COVID?
Absolutely. Well, then, the multitude of layers of difficulty that COVID brought on, we all experienced them, right? We all kind of went through those very similar challenges. Um, it was tough being stationed abroad, trying to help families who were trying to navigate that isolation and limited access to resources. And that whole experience actually really highlighted for me the importance of adaptable support systems, right? So things like telehealth and mental health resources that families really can access wherever they are, regardless of how how and where they're, currently serving or stationed. And so that really highlighted for me that opportunity and those discussions. And while those systems were in place during COVID because we were in a global pandemic, those are sometimes been policies and programs that kind of went away once we determined that COVID had maybe subsided or it was manageable because now we have a vaccine, right? So making sure that those policies, though, and those programs remain flexible and adaptable so that families can access them even in those times of crisis is really important and is something that has informed my advocacy moving forward. So I always try to make sure that I remind folks that, hey, some of the policies, programs, initiatives, you'll hear me say that phrase a lot because I use it often, but some of those things, the way that we apply them stateside doesn't necessarily provide an opportunity or a resource for families overseas. So how do we make sure that families that are based overseas have the same access or similar access to similar resources so that they can make sure that they're taking care of themselves and their well-being?
It's so important that you're thinking of that and looking at those gaps. And I think one of the things that came out that we could all relate to from COVID was more of that work from home flexibility. And that's something at Mission Roll Call we've seen a lot is the military spouse employment, kind of a persistent challenge. Like we know that the military spouse unemployment rates are still unusually high. And I would just love to hear your perspective on that and your take on that as someone who, did come in as a military spouse, but an advocate before that of what that's looked like within the community and the challenges maybe a civilian wouldn't understand about why it's so hard to maintain employment as a military spouse.
Absolutely. So, as is anything, and Britt, I know you'll agree, it's multi-layered, right? It's multiple things that kind of contribute to this larger challenge that we call military spouse employment, military spouse underemployment, right? So not even working maybe at your highest like skill set level or to your highest degree education, attained education level. All of those are challenges and issues, obviously. We've seen a really strong focus both in Congress and in the executive branch on military spouse employment from the perspective of licensed or occupational professions. And there has been a tremendous amount of work and even federal funding appropriations, congressional appropriations that have come to bear to help support things like compacts and facilitating those compacts so that spouses can move those licenses and certifications right from state to state and try to give them an opportunity to retain that employment as best we can. Now, that looks different again for spouses that might be coming overseas. What does that mean to have an occupational profession, to have a license, to have a certificate that's required for your employment? And how do you use that overseas? Can you use that overseas? What does that mean? So helping spouses understand, again, what their potential career or what potential job or employment that they're seeking, how does that apply in different contexts and situations, but also what are the different ways that they can use those employment opportunities to help support income for themselves and career, right? If they still want that. Something else that's really interesting is that, there's been a tremendous amount of effort both by the National Military Spouse Network, the Military Officers Association of America. Lots of organizations that have supported this piece of legislation called the Military Spouse Hiring Act. And again, this effort has been ongoing for well over a decade. I'm not breaking news here to anyone in the military support community or even the veteran support community, but this legislation would actually expand an already existing tax credit called the Work Opportunity Tax Credit, or WOTC. It's a federal program that provides tax credits to employers who hire employees that might face disproportionate barriers to employment in the workplace or, just generally. And military spouses absolutely meet that definition, as do summer youth hires, as do veterans, right? So we've added, as time has gone on, Congress has added target communities, right, to this program to help support employment and just employment opportunities for those individuals that are impacted. And we have been trying through that Military Spouse Hiring Act to get military spouses added as a target group for that benefit, so that our employers, who often say that it cost them a lot of money to onboard us into their companies, into their organizations, or working remotely, to help mitigate some of that cost for them, right? By offering them that tax credit. So that's still an ongoing effort. I love that you mentioned it because it does have the support of nearly 3/4 of the United States Congress. It would be awesome to see Capitol Hill pass that and offer that as yet another tool in the military spouse toolkit, so that we have the chance, right, to seek out those employment opportunities and also to encourage employers to hire us.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is a little bit of a curveball, but I had seen this article a week or so ago. I think it was from the Secretary of the Army, and she was talking about military recruitment and making it more attractive for a younger generation who wants different things. And one of the biggest points she was talking about was military spouse employment and underemployment. And she mentioned specifically PCSing. And if that time was extended so that a spouse wasn't leaving every 2 years, leaving a job that maybe didn't offer as much flexibility, even in a post-COVID world, to maybe 5 years. Just curious, like your thoughts on that, not to make you take a stance one way or another, but if there's like little wins, I guess, like that maybe would be beneficial or helpful and impactful for the military spouse community too.
Sure. I mean, I think, for the military to consider that, it would make sense, right? There's a lot of impacts and consequences of the regular and consistent moving,
Mhm.
non-certain, unreimbursable PCS costs that you might incur, whether it's, we address the pet fee issue, right, by establishing now a mechanism to get reimbursed for pet fees if you're having to take commercial air travel and government air travel is not available for whatever reason, et cetera, et cetera. So, we've tried to get after some of those non-reimbursable PCS costs. But that's definitely an element of it is having to move every 2 to 3 years. That's every 2 to 3 years. You're picking up all of your stuff. Yes, the movers are coming and they're packing out your house, but nobody talks about, okay, you get to your place and maybe half of your stuff is damaged, right?
Mhm.
And now you're having to replace things, and that's an additional expense. And when you get reimbursed, it's at the depreciated value of the item. So even if you've taken really good care of that thing and it happens to unfortunately get damaged in the move, it becomes, you've had it for 10 years. Well, the depreciated value is a fraction of what you'd actually purchased it for, right? So now you're losing some finance and some financial well-being there because you're having to have those expenses every 2 to 3 years. So that's one element of it. But the other thing is there a way, if we were willing to consider something like go with me on this journey here, Britt.
Oh.
Something like the Work Opportunity Tax Credit expansion or the Military Spouse Hiring Act. I'm going to keep saying its official title. If we were to pass the Military Spouse Hiring Act and employers said, oh my gosh, this is great. Let me hire this rock star military spouse. They are phenomenal. I want to keep them when they PCS. As a military spouse, you'd go to your employer and say, oh, look, we just got orders. Unfortunately, we're going to be PCSing. Oh, where are you going? Okay, well, I'm going to wherever. Insert, new duty station here. Well, great. What about, would you consider taking your work with you remotely?
Mhm.
What if that were the conversation that employers were getting to have with the military spouse, and the opportunity that military spouses were getting to say, yes, it would be great in this time of a great transition, which is the PCS, when costs might be, unexpected or unanticipated that might exceed, your family's singular income budget from the service member or your sponsor. Wouldn't it be great to have that additional income, that second income, and have that confidence in knowing that, hey, we're going to make it through this big transition. No matter what, we'll be okay. If we need financial help or resources, we've got a second income to help us do that or be responsive to whatever our family might need. It's just food for thought. I don't necessarily think the extension of assignments is the only path, but I think it's probably part of a larger discussion about all of the different things that kind of go into this.
Well, I'm with you on the journey. I think it's important to have these conversations, and like we were talking about, just to be able to identify some gaps or maybe some some wins. Not all of them are low hanging fruit. Actually, probably most of them are not, because it's so layered and complex, like we were saying. But just even a personal anecdote, my brother was moving across the country, change of duty station, and his son got really sick with pneumonia. Like 3 days before the moving companies were coming to take all their things, and they lived on a base, so it was extra complicated. Somebody was getting ready to move in to where they were moving out, and it ended up being fine and working out, and his son was released, the day after. But they, were going to be late to meet their moving truck in their new state. It was just all of these like things that you don't think about. And it just takes me back to what you were saying about that sense of community and building that tribe within the military family community, because you've talked about the importance of paying it forward and your commitment to doing that within this community. And for them, my sister-in-law was able to turn to her neighbors and these friends that they'd made on base, to really be a network of support for them. But I think, have you seen other examples of that? Just the way that the community has been able to kind of stand behind each other and support one another through whatever it is that's happening?
Absolutely. And this is the connective tissue that brings, I think, or that is so unique about our military community and veteran community. I mean, I would consider, those all the one and the same. It's that community, it's that connection. It's everything in our world. I have been so fortunate to receive so much love and care and support from others all along the way, that I think we all feel a responsibility to help pay it forward for someone else, for that next, person or individual who doesn't necessarily maybe even realize that they're struggling, or that they want a connection, or that they need community. But who you see, right? You see something in them, or you say, hey, I just want to be a friend to you. Let me be a good connection and support system for you. And that's what I'd really say to new spouses, right? Is stay open to building those connections. It's really amazing. I'll share a personal story, and it's not something that I've really talked about publicly, but I will here because I think it's so important. I was expecting with our very first child here overseas. I was of course scared, because you are as you are when you don't know what to expect when you're expecting, kind of thing, and but excited. And unfortunately, I went through a pretty terrible miscarriage, and it was really tough being far from home, not having your family, your loved ones around you to help support you, your bestie cat, right? You're kind of far from the people that you know and care about and you love. But because I had such a fantastic and phenomenal connection with my other bestie, Maggie, my neighbor, she was ready to help do whatever she could, right? She was right there. Had to call her and say, hey, Maggie, can you help feed our dog? Fed the dog, walked the dog, brought the dog home, and said, hey, whatever you need, I'm here for you. But then she just kept showing up and kept helping and kept supporting until I was comfortable enough and had recovered to have the conversation with our families that we'd even been pregnant. And so it was a really difficult and challenging situation, but that having that strong support network really made all the difference. And sharing and supporting each other through those experiences, through those shared experiences, really helps build, I think, a good, positive resilience. And so I'm really grateful for that opportunity to get to encourage community, that sense of community and strength for others, and encourage them not to be, because you never know. You never know when someone is going to reach out to you and just need you to be that community for them, or when you are going to need someone to be that community for you.
Hmm. Well, I just really appreciate you sharing that. I'm so sorry that happened to you, Heba. You experienced that, and that I can empathize with you, unfortunately. But I think that's what's really special about the military family community, or the military community in general, that maybe the average person wouldn't understand, is that we tend to have these networks or these communities that we've had for a really long time. So if you're from a hometown, you grew up with certain people, or maybe went to college together, and you kind of keep these, you might have people fall off along the way, but you kind of keep this like core group. And what's really special, I think, about the military community is that that happens over and over and over again, that it's this new group here for this few years and this new group here for this few years. And everyone's just watching out for each other in that moment of time that they're together. And I think that's what you just demonstrated in that story, is you don't have to know someone for years and years and years to be able to have a strong and meaningful connection with them. So appreciate that you're building that.
Well, and I'm sorry to hear that you can empathize. It's something that, unfortunately, a lot of people don't talk about, understandably so. It's very personal. It can be very difficult to talk about. And but it's something that more military spouses, the more I share, even quietly, just so that they feel comfortable and knowing that, hey, you're talking to someone who can empathize with you, who has this shared experience with you, that you're a safe place for them to come and share that emotional side of sometimes being a part of this community. It's it's important, but it's tough. So I'm glad that we have that shared experience, and at least we know now, so we can talk to one another. But it's a good demonstration of why community and connection is really, really important.
It really is. And yes, and I want to take you back to the advocacy side just for a second, because that's a core function of how Mission Roll Call operates. And I think for people who may be unfamiliar with the power of advocacy, I'd just love to hear from your side, maybe a story or two of how you've seen the impact of advocacy efforts, and just your experience with that.
Absolutely. Well, advocacy has kind of been the buzzword. I love that, people are talking about advocacy and wanting to engage in advocacy. And this is something that I talk a lot about whenever I'm invited to, speaking engagements to talk about things like the National Defense Authorization Act and the importance of that and why it's a piece of legislation we should pay attention to, because it does impact us, even as military families, right? So we have an opportunity to shape it, and we have an opportunity to shape it through our advocacy, through storytelling, through sharing experiences and the things that, we observe and that we go through being part of this community. And that advocacy can actually have a very powerful ripple effect. Mm-hmm. I've seen it firsthand in healthcare access and on employment efforts, working with policymakers to address those military family needs and those quality of life, topics. That tangible change is incredibly rewarding. And it almost always starts with someone sharing their story. Someone sharing like, hey, this is my experience. This is what I went through. Not necessarily having to come up with the 100% solution, but offering a lens of context and insight to decision makers and policymakers and senior leaders so that they better understand how these programs, policies, and initiatives can best serve the community and the community's needs. And so advocacy on that level, at the federal level, it's incredible. And it's really, it's really proactive, and it's everywhere. You see it everywhere on a whole host of issues. But in the military community, it's a very unique kind of thing that we do together by engaging in that storytelling. That advocacy can also happen small scale, right? It can be in your local community, and it can take the form of like helping shape a local support network, or building something, or having some kind of engagement where people can just come together and get to know one another. We actually just opened up a couple of weeks ago. I think at this point, all the weeks are blending together for me, but a couple of weeks ago, we here at Ramstein Air Base, the Military Family Readiness Center just opened up a spouse hub on base.
How cool.
And it's an awesome like space where the 86th Air Wing actually offered their squadron like innovation funding. I think it was like $16,500 to help open up this space for spouses who are coming into the Ramstein and Kaiserslautern military community to kind of have a soft landing spot, right? So that advocacy, it is small scale, it's local, it's informed by the needs of our community. And that's why it's going, I have every hope and dream that it's going to be wildly successful in bringing spouses together into that same area. I love that the spouse is in the title, right? Like, this is a place for you. You belong here. Please come and be a part of this. And so advocacy doesn't have to just be legislation. It doesn't have to be, in Congress and talking to members of Congress and their staff. It certainly does happen there. But advocacy is also, again, at that local level. And advocacy is also talking with, other individuals who maybe aren't connected to our community and helping them, right, learn, understand, appreciate even the opportunities and the benefits of being a part of this very close-knit community, all of us, that are a part of this. And so it can happen at different levels. It can happen in different spaces, but advocacy and the powerful nature of sharing your story and being able to tell your story, that is something that is really unrivaled in the advocacy space. So it's incredibly unique and very, very powerful.
It is powerful, and I think it feels actionable. I just love the way that you said that, because I was going to ask you about that kind of that barrier to entry feeling. When you hear the term advocacy, it can just seem like, oh, I don't even know where to begin. Like, I have things that I care about or issues that I'm really passionate about, but I'm just XYZ person in XYZ place. And I think you really demonstrated really beautifully there that it doesn't have to be that there's all levels of advocacy, and it can be on these smaller levels too and still have big impact. And I know we don't know each other that well yet, but one of the things I admire about you already is it seems like you're able to be on both sides. Like, you obviously have the human element of being a military spouse and a friend who's as part of this community, but you're also able to kind of put on this other hat and say, is there an area here of opportunity? And it just seems really special, what you're doing.
Well, I appreciate that. That means a lot. I really struggled, I think, initially when I became a part of the community, because I was 29 years old. I was a little bit older, seasoned, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, I like tenured, maybe. Yeah.
Yep, I'm a 1989 Swiftie. So, I was a little bit older. I already had a career. I was living on my own. I was financially independent. And when I became a part of the military spouse community, I wasn't really sure, like, well, what am I going to give back to people? Like, what am I going to do to help support and take care of these people who are so gracious with their time volunteering and supporting to take care of us, right? How do I get involved in that? How do I become a part of this? And it wasn't actually until another military spouse, a mentor of mine, as a matter of fact, who shared with me that,
Shout out. Who is it? Just kidding.
I won't shout out this particular, because you're my mentor. I'm going to protect their mentorship to me. But I will say that this mentor said to me, Heba, your professional experience and expertise can actually be really helpful to our community, because we talk a lot about advocacy, but we don't necessarily have those tools to understand, okay, when Congress is discussing, parental leave and discussing childcare, and they don't, how do we engage? How do we engage in a way that both honors the experiences that we've had as spouses and as community members, and also honors and respects the boundaries of lobbying, things like lobbying. And so there was a lot of, confusion even about terminology and understanding and helping military spouses in our community understand that when you are sharing your personal story about an experience that you have had, that's not lobbying, it's advocacy. It's advocacy, right? You're helping lend context, you're educating and informing, and spouses and military members, veterans shouldn't be shy about that, because you're not asking for, you're not lobbying, right? There's a very, very narrow definition that is considered lobbying. And so that's not what you're doing. But I appreciate I appreciate those kind words about helping to give back, and that it's inspiring. It's my way of contributing to our community, and it's really an honor to get to use what little skills and knowledge I have to help facilitate their goals, and because they're building for us, they're building for me and my family too. And just because we don't have children yet doesn't mean that all of those childcare advocates out there aren't building a much brighter future and opportunity for me and my spouse when we do have, children, God willing, someday. So I see it as just, this is what we do for each other. We just build for one another.
Yeah, definitely. And you're doing that every day. I'm going to check my notes so I get this name right, because it was a little of a mouthful for me. But you mentioned you were recently named an ambassador of policy and legislative affairs for Five and Thrive, which is incredible. Congratulations. I would just love to know more about that, that initiative and your role in it.
So Five and Thrive is such an awesome initiative. And awesome, I say, because I don't know how many people are kind of like maybe tracking and know this, but each of the military departments actually defines quality of life differently. So the Department of the Army includes PCSs in their quality of life kind of matrix and program. The Department of the Navy calls it quality of service. Air Force, yes, calls it quality of life, but it looks just a little bit different. And so every department and every service branch kind of approaches quality of life a little bit differently. So when we say quality of life, it means different things to different people. And the beauty of Five and Thrive is that they've helped kind of put some structure around what we are calling quality of life by identifying the 5 primary quality of life challenges that military families tend to experience or face, which is really childcare, education, healthcare, housing, and spouse employment. Now, those aren't the limiting, right? That's not a ceiling. It's just it's a floor to kind of get us all level set on when we say quality of life. We're talking at least about these 5 areas, but we could also be talking about things like EFMP, which is impacted across childcare and education and housing, right? Those components all play into EFMP or EFMP support for those families as well. But in addition to those 5 kind of main focus areas or primary focus areas, there's also these 5 lines of effort to facilitating advocacy and empowering military communities to help address those quality of life challenges or concerns by helping advocate for quality of life improvements, fostering community partnerships along with military ones, right? So having that entire military quality of life experience model that communities can enter into, that spouses get to be a part of, that military leaders who have the authority and the resources in many instances, right, to help facilitate best practices and maybe even unique programs that respond to local community needs. Those are all things that make Five and Thrive very unique, because it's encouraging all of these different players, the community partners, your military connected families, and those military leaders to come together to work on those issues, to address those challenges together. And so that quality of life experience model really helps build a stronger total force, improve readiness, improve recruitment, and retention. And it allows for really community, local partnership building, collaboration, and ultimately the creation of solutions that can then help empower those military members and those families to thrive in the most meaningful way to them. Right. So I think that's the really unique thing about Five and Thrive. Obviously, it initially started in the Department of the Air Force, but now it's grown and expanded to all of the military service branches. And the Thrive team has even been building these guides, right, resource guides for communities that are specific to them, right? So National Guard, Reserve component, Air Force, and building them out for the services, building them out for, other elements of our total force. And it's actually been really incredible to see, because they have become a much more utilized living resource and document that people can contribute to as well. So sharing those best practices and showing people that, like, hey, look, what what housing partnership or collaboration or childcare partnership or collaboration they had at Tinker may not necessarily work at Creech or may not necessarily work at, Fort Greg Adams, but it might work over, at this installation. So really encouraging that collaboration and sharing of those initiatives is super important and a really, really neat thing that Five and Thrive helps empower.
That's awesome. And it's just interesting, like you said, with the importance of the shared language. Just how are we defining quality of life? And just starting there, it seems so basic. Like, oh, clearly all of the service branches would have the same definition, but they don't. And addressing that first and making sure it's really holistic. We're really excited because Mission Rolepa is going to have on a guest later in the year, Austin Carrig, and she's part of Exceptional Families of the Military. Well, she has her own nonprofit, but EFMP means a lot to her and her family. And it's just really interesting to hear their perspective, their stories about kind of falling through the gaps in that program, how it was designed and how it could support other families. Just the way it could be improved or modified is so intriguing. So, like you said, it's just really important to have that shared language, understand essentially what's the framework we're building off of. And then I love that there's that collaborative element of, you have a voice in this and a say in how this is defined and written.
Absolutely. And, not every military connected family member or spouse is going to be comfortable, having those conversations. And that's okay. It doesn't mean that you're any less of an advocate, right? You can be an advocate for your own family. You can be, again, an advocate in your own home for the things that you need locally. But for those that are looking to or have a nonprofit like Austin does, and Austin and I have been part of this community together for a lot. I've learned a lot from her and from EFM, her nonprofit organization, just about some of the ways that being an EFMP connected family and having those needs, right? Some of the very unique ways that you need to be able to access your healthcare, some of the very unique ways you need to access housing, right? Or your unique housing needs might apply to you. Education needs are different for you, for your family. And I think of it the same way for the overseas families, right? It's again, very different the way you need to access some of these, or the way that some of these quality of life topics impact you and your ability then, right, to access resources either within the Department of Defense, like military-owned resources, or community-based resources. Those look differently depending on where you are and what the circumstance is. And I really admire organizations, obviously like Austin's and EFM, and how they are doing their part to be a collaborative voice on behalf of impacted families. And so that's a fantastic, again, demonstration or example of how you use a lived experience to help kind of bring everyone together and say, okay, we need to bring some shared language and shared understanding of these issues or these experiences to Congress, to the Department of Defense, and to larger community partners that might be able to support our needs.
Oh, absolutely. That's what I was going to say is it came back to storytelling and just the impact that can have. And really that's, my last, I think, question for you, pending anything that you wanted to add on is we've talked about how military families support each other. But for November, it's Veteran and National Veteran and Military Families Month. What do you think are some ways that civilians or the general public could better support or maybe understand the experiences of the military community?
So I love this month. I think it's just such a unique opportunity to really recognize the contributions and sacrifices of veterans and military families alike. And really one of the best ways that I can encourage civilians or folks who may not be connected to this community and how they can support this understanding and this awareness is by really taking time to learn about these experiences, right? And offer that support, whether it's volunteering somewhere locally. If you have a local VFW chapter or American Legion, and maybe you've never stepped foot inside, take that. Yes, all are welcome, right? Come on in. Let's, and ask about those stories. That's something that I, as as a young person and then now as a military spouse love to ask people, which is, hey, can you tell me your story? Because it always starts with a really good story, right? What they're working on, what they care about, what people are passionate about. And you learn through that storytelling, through that sharing about how can you as a community member help support our nation's veterans and military families more. We all have a network, right? An extended network of family that supports us and loves us. And they hear about our experiences and our stories. And so, they know and they love us and they support that. But with such a growing and unfortunately sometimes negative perception of this community, I think it's just really important for us to just spend time in each other's spaces. And so simple gestures of appreciation and support really can mean a lot. Even just showing up and saying, oh, I really want to thank you for your service, but I'd love it if you'd share a story with me, right? Asking to have those conversations, and then us taking the opportunity to be a little bit maybe vulnerable and to share those experiences with others so that they can understand, maybe through our lens and our context, just the both the opportunities, the benefits of being part of a community that takes care of one another at all costs, right? It's not just leave no one behind, it's leave no one alone. You don't do anything alone in this family. It's a big family, but you don't do anything alone, and you certainly never have to do it alone, right? And I think that's something that's really, really special. And I think that it's important that during this month we appreciate and acknowledge those contributions, but also help society understand just the real benefits and the real joys of getting to be a part of our small knit society.
That's beautifully said. And Heba, we're just so grateful to have been connected with you and to get to learn more about you and what you're working on. And thank you just so much for sharing that, and just for really your continuous support and encouragement of other military spouses in the military community. And we're excited to hopefully be able to partner with you more and to be able to share more about the initiatives that you're working on and all that you're doing to be a voice, or one of the voices in that community. So thank you really so much for being here with us today, and hope we do even more with you in the future.
Absolutely. No, thank you so much for having me, Britt. And I really do mean it. Families, veterans, military members deserve a seat at that table. And it's there for the taking if we want it. And there's absolutely a way for us to be fantastic and effective advocates for one another and for future individuals who decide to serve in our nation's uniform. And so it's a really important way for us to give back. And I'm, again, just really honored that I get to be a very small piece of it.
Well, you are. And thank you so much again for all that you're doing. And for all those that are listening, we just appreciate you tuning in to the Lasting Mission podcast and helping Mission Roll Call be able to be a voice for veterans and their families. So continue to check out all that we have going on in our future episodes at missionrollcall.org. Thank you again, Heba.
Thanks so much.